Exciting day today. A whole bunch is going on in the world, not just in Russia and Ukraine. We've also got some news on China today. We've got some stuff to talk about regarding cryptos. Cryptos are up big. There's some exciting news coming there as well. And we're going to talk about, obviously, Russia and Ukraine because those are that's a big area going on in the stock market right now. There's a lot of volatility being caused by that. In fact, if you look at the overall S&P just yesterday, you can see some of the massive volatility that was caused when we got some actual decent news, depending on how you look at it, coming out about Russia and Ukraine. You can actually see that the stock market moved up quite a bit and then kind of receded, but now we're moving up again during the after hours and pre-market. So all around, things are looking pretty good. And good morning, Teflon Don, Rich M, Francis, Rocky Mountain Gobblers, Rogelio, and Robert. Good morning, guys. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We've got a bunch of exciting stuff going on today. So yesterday, you guys probably noticed that at some point the market was actually pumping, right? We moved up pretty darn quickly over the course of just an hour or so. In fact, we were up about 2.5% on the S&P, which is a big move for the S&P, especially over the course of an hour or two. We quickly gave up those gains and ended the day near lows. However, we're now moving up during the after hours and pre-market. So things are looking good in the market. And this came after news that, in a nod to Russia, Ukraine says it's no longer insisting on a NATO membership. And this is a big deal because the whole reason, well, one of the reasons that Putin says he's invading Ukraine, not that he's calling it an invasion, is because he doesn't want Ukraine to become a part of NATO. So President Zelensky said he is no longer pressing for NATO membership for Ukraine, a delicate issue that was one of Russia's stated reasons for invading its pro-Western neighbor. So this is all in all looking like a situation where maybe Ukraine is willing to give over a little bit to Russia's side and not end up demanding a NATO membership, which it certainly would have benefited from having, but it's too late for that at this point. However, if it does decide to give that up and Russia decides to end the invasion, then we could be looking at a swift end to this whole situation. We'll see what kind of sanctions remain in place after the fact if we do end up getting a peaceful resolution coming sometime soon. However, in the meantime, there are still a bunch of sanctions going on. Analysts are saying it could cause a recession. We're going to look at what's happened in the world of sanctions. There are not just oil-related sanctions, which we're going to start off with, but there are all kinds of companies that are implementing self-censorship in Russia, self-sanctions in Russia. So there's a bunch of stuff going on. First, we'll talk about some of what we already know. So Biden says U.S. will ban Russian oil imports. All right, we already know that. We talked about that in the stream yesterday. And the U.S. is not in the most precarious position oil-wise, right? Only about 1% of U.S. oil that we refine here comes from Russia. So it's not all that much of our overall oil. So that's how we're able to do it. But Biden is announcing that the United States is not going to be accepting Russian oil, right? He says, actually, in a quote, "Today, I am announcing the United States is targeting the main artery of Russia's economy. We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. That means Russian oil will no longer be acceptable at U.S. ports, and the American people will deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine." Now, that's pretty impactful because oil accounts for about 40%, somewhere close to 40% of the Russian federal budget. So the Russian federal budget, about 40% of what they get for that comes from oil revenue. So obviously not most of that is going to the U.S., but the EU is also pledging to cut Russian gas imports by 2/3 before the end of the year. Now, the EU is in a bit of a tougher spot. It's a bit more difficult for the EU to actually implement a sweeping sanction like the U.S. can because they rely on a whole bunch more Russian oil than we do. But this is breaking news, right? This happened just yesterday and after the live stream, right? So we missed it in the live stream. It didn't happen at that point, but we can cover it today. So the EU is also cutting their Russian gas imports. So Russia's going to have to figure out where they're sending that oil. Now, they say they'll have no problem with it. They'll probably send a decent amount of it to China. It's worth noting that the EU imported around 45% of its gas from Russia in 2021. So the EU is going to have a tough time finding all that extra makeup oil, right? They're going to have to figure out where they're going to get all of that extra oil. And before we get too deep into the stream, I do want to mention that we're going to be talking about some of the hottest stocks of the week, the month. Muln, CEI. We'll also be talking a little bit about Sundial and DWAC as well. But we will continue on with the overall news that affects, not just stocks in specifically, but the overall markets, right? We'll talk about that a little bit first, and then we'll dive into the individual stocks around market open. So analysts warn of recession if oil prices continue to surge further into uncharted territory. In fact, they say if Russia retaliates to all of these new sanctions and all of these limitations by refusing to supply Europe with oil, that could easily send oil prices up another $20 to $30 per barrel. And we're already seeing massive increases in the cost of oil, right? Oil has already gotten incredibly expensive. And that is surely going to eke into many other parts of the economy. Even though the United States doesn't use a bunch of Russian oil, that doesn't mean that oil isn't going to get a lot more expensive here. You guys have already noticed it at the gas pumps, most likely. I just filled up yesterday, and because I did it at Costco, where I have a membership, I was actually able to get gas for below $4 a gallon. I think it was $3.80, which I never thought I would be looking at that thinking that's a good price, but now I am. Because the average cost in the country, I believe, is $4.17 per gallon of gasoline. At least that's what it was yesterday. It's not looking good for gas prices. Now, this analyst says, my greatest fear is that these prices have risen so fast that you cause a recession in Europe and Latin America. That rolls on into the United States, and that ultimately affects China's ability to sell consumer goods to the rest of the world. Now, that's a possibility. Could we be entering a recession? It's possible. But overall, it's not yet confirmed, right? We don't know for sure if we're going to be entering a recession. It doesn't seem like it would be the soonest thing to hit the United States, at least. If someone was to enter a recession, it would likely, like this guy said, be Europe, potentially Latin America as well, happening there first. And then maybe that would roll into the United States. We'll just have to see how the economies react to that. It's really tough to predict exactly how these kinds of things are going to affect the economy, but it's certainly possible. And it's something to consider. I mean, maybe there's a recession on the way. There are a couple of indicators that might be the case, but overall, depending on the resolution we get to this whole situation, maybe we'll end up seeing Russia get accepted back into trade. I mean, it looks like Ukraine is starting to accept some of Russia's stipulations. Maybe Russia will have some other things that they demand. Maybe they'll demand relief from some of the sanctions. Who knows what's going to happen? But it's not a guarantee yet, all right? It's a fear that this guy has, that this analyst has. It's a fear in the back of my mind as well, because Russia does supply quite a bit of oil to the world, right? Russia supplies about 11% of global oil consumption, 17% of global gas consumption, and 40% of Western European gas consumption. So a big player in Europe especially. But even worldwide, it's a pretty significant amount of oil that Russia is producing. Over 10%, so over a tenth of the oil that is consumed is produced by Russia. So it's slightly scary to see. However, Russia is likely going to be able to divert where they're sending this oil. Some of it may end up being able to go to China, and then China would have less demand from other places. It's a whole system, a whole network. And as long as there are some places where Russia can send this, the effects might not be as far-reaching. Obviously, oil will be getting more expensive for everyone who's not accepting Russian oil. But people who are could potentially be selling oil to the nations that need it, right? I mean, I'm not sure exactly how deep these sanctions go. If they stop us from buying oil from China, maybe China wants to start selling oil that they've bought from Russia. Who knows what kind of tricks they can pull there. But you never know how this situation is going to work out. You never know what's going to happen in these kinds of situations. There are all kinds of ways to divert these supply chains that could end up not leading to a recession. So it's impossible really to say what's going to happen thus far. But the one thing that we can almost be certain of is that prices are going to increase. And that's important to think about because the CPI is actually coming out tomorrow, right? The inflation report is coming out tomorrow at 8:30. So make sure to join us for the live stream tomorrow because boy, oh boy, is it probably going to be a doozy. I mean, they're forecasting 7.9% inflation year over year. Our last reading was 7.5%, so they're still expecting a big increase. And it's worth noting that of all of the inflation reports that we've gotten, we've either hit the expectation on the dot or we've surpassed it. So all of the past expectations for the past, since April 13th of 2021, we've either been seeing more inflation than what we were forecasting or we hit it on the dot. So I doubt we would see any less than 7.9% year over year inflation according to the CPI. Likely more. It's very potentially possible that we'll see much greater than the forecast. We'll have to see what happens tomorrow. It's going to be an interesting one. The stock market's probably going to be moving big one way or another. And it looks like it's moving big right now. So we'll see what's going on in the world right now after we continue with the stories we've got. But look at that. So at a G7 meeting, Business Minister Kwasaki Kwarteng says we fully intend to end our dependence on all Russian hydrocarbons. The UK business minister. So the UK is announcing the end of Russian oil, and potentially that's helping out the stock market a little bit, but not necessarily only that. So anyways, I will say that the price of oil right now, at the very least, is actually moving down. So oil prices are down. That is having an impact on the stock market overall, as well as oil stocks, right? You can see the stock market has been reacting quite well to this news. In the after hours and pre-market, we're up quite a bit. We're getting a little spike right now. Oil stocks started to get hit yesterday. CEI actually had a massive dip from 198 all the way down to $1 before it rebounded a bit. Now we're currently sitting pretty darn close to $1.07. So we're not that far off from the lows of this pump with CEI. A dollar did hold us as support last time. Hopefully we'll bounce off of that this morning. Hopefully we'll start continuing on the way up. It seems likely that we could see much higher gas prices. That's a real possibility. And if we do, that would be another catalyst driving CEI. It's not a guarantee. You probably, if you were green or if you are green, want to start considering taking profits. That might be a potential move to make, not financial advice. But whenever you're in the green in a big way, it might not be the worst idea to start taking little profits here and there. And surely a lot of people are green. Over $1. There are still a lot of people who are buying this thing at 45 cents, at 83 cents, and all the way down to 63 cents again. And maybe we're going to get a rebound. Maybe we're going higher. Hopefully we are. It's a play that I'm in right now. If we break below $1 in a significant way, that's probably when I'd be looking to cut losses. But we'll see what happens with CEI. Right now, it looks like we might be using $1 as support, and hopefully we will. It looks like we will be starting the day down, though, unless we make a big move to the upside. It looks like as oil has gotten a little bit cheaper, CEI has gotten, or a little bit cheaper as well, right? This is an oil play. So we'll see what goes on with CEI stock. Hopefully nothing too horrific. But there are horrific things going on in Russia, and you'll think this is really horrific if you like drinking Coca-Cola, Pepsi, going to Starbucks, or eating at McDonald's, especially if you live in Russia, because 4 big U.S. brands have halted their operations in Russia. Pepsi, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and Starbucks are suspending business in Russia after the country's invasion of Ukraine, and that's a symbolic move to help strengthen the resistance to Russia's invasion, right? Everybody wants to be on the side of Ukraine and cut off business ties with Russia, including these big businesses. Now, my suspicion is initially they didn't actually want to cut off these business ties, but in the recent days before their announcement, all 4 had faced heavy criticism for continuing to operate in Russia. Now, I believe that McDonald's gets maybe 9% of its business. That's the only one that I looked into specifically from Russia. It's either 9 or 11%. But all of these companies get some business from Russia. In fact, Pepsi has sold its product in Russia for more than 6 decades. Coca-Cola entered Russia in 1992. McDonald's entered in 1990, and Starbucks in 2007. So all of them have been operating there for a long time. They probably get a decent amount of revenue from Russia, and it's probably not the best for their bottom line to be cutting off business operations there, but it is deemed necessary by very many people. A lot of people like the idea of them cutting out business in Russia, and that's certainly something that's acceptable to do if they wish. Now, there is something going on in some other types of companies, right? A lot of other types of companies are also cutting off business with Russia or cutting off access to Russia, but for different reasons, okay? TikTok, a Chinese-owned company, limits services in Russia, and Netflix pulls out of Russia as well. Now, why is this happening, right? TikTok said it has suspended live streaming and new content from its platform as it assesses tough new laws to crack down on fake news about Russia's armed forces. So Russia has implemented some laws because they don't like what a lot of people in Russia are saying about this whole situation, about the invasion of Ukraine. And it's completely understandable that people are pissed about this invasion because it has made life very difficult for people who live in Russia. It's made people, Russian citizens' lives very difficult because they are basically cut off from the world financially, right? Their currency has all but collapsed, and they're looking at huge lines to get cash out of ATMs so that they can go to the grocery store and pay huge inflated prices, and nobody's too happy about what's going on economically at the moment. And my guess is that the vast majority of Russian citizens would much rather have had a situation where Putin decided not to invade Ukraine and they could have continued living their daily normal lives instead of almost lived in this calamity. You could almost call it a calamity in Russia. It's not nearly as bad as what's going on in Ukraine, where they're dealing with a bunch of evacuations and missiles and all kinds of troops entering the country. But it is not a pretty situation. And believe me, not that I'm the most well-versed in it, right? I don't live in Russia or anything like that. But I can imagine that if this was happening in the United States and we were going through similar circumstances, people would be pretty darn outraged at what was going on. So the new law that cracks down on fake news, supposedly fake news from Russia, right? Russia's deeming it fake news, is basically sending people to jail for up to 15 years if they write anything that Russia deems to be false about the military. So calling Ukraine what's going on there, calling it an invasion, or saying that it's a war, or that Russia's doing anything bad, or that the military is killing people, whatnot. That kind of stuff would probably land you in a Russian jail for up to 15 years. So somewhat scary stuff, and that is why TikTok has suspended live streaming services and new content posting from its platform in Russia. Okay, Netflix has also pulled their stuff from Russia, and Chinese-owned TikTok has been criticized for not speaking out against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Unlike its peers, which have, right? Meta and Twitter have both spoken out against what's been going on in Russia. But in a longer statement on the TikTok website, it said that it described the war in Ukraine as devastating, adding that it had brought pain to our community and our people. Now, TikTok says that they're making the move to ban this content in order to protect its users from breaking Russia's new fake news laws. Okay, so it says that it's doing that, and potentially it's also a bit of a ding to Russia, right? It's basically making a bunch of the content creators in Russia a little pissed, because Russia has many high-profile creators who make their living from TikTok, and we can expect those people to be pretty darn motivated to protest against the fake news laws, especially, if this is their main source of income. If they're making most of their money posting those viral TikTok videos, you can expect that they're pretty pissed, because they're probably making quite a bit doing that. Now, it is good to see, though, TikTok, Chinese-owned company, speaking out against Russia. It's good to see that at least some Chinese entities are speaking out against the atrocities that are going on. Now, unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of people in Ukraine suffer quite a bit. Ukrainians flee some besieged cities as conditions worsen. Now, we got reports yesterday that there were some ceasefire agreements going on with Russia, but that Russia was breaking the ceasefire agreements, essentially closing off evacuation routes other than the ones that led to Russia, so kind of taking a bunch of these Ukrainian citizens almost hostage in Russia, not maybe literally to that extent, but essentially that's how Ukraine was viewing it. So some of the evacuation attempts have been cut off, but it looks like maybe some of them are being reignited. And as of 16 minutes ago, at least, Ukrainians are fleeing some of the besieged cities once again. So we're seeing it be a tough situation. I mean, I can't imagine that anyone here in the United States is ever likely to see a situation where they're going to have to flee their homes. Fortunately enough, the United States is pretty geographically isolated, fairly strong in that position, right? We have oceans on two sides of us. We have Canada to our north, and I don't think they're going to invade us. In Mexico, good luck if they try to invade us. So we're pretty geographically isolated in terms of military powers who would really threaten us, and it seems unlikely that we'll ever have to evacuate to the extent that Ukrainians are. I mean, it's a really tough situation to have to leave your homes behind and walk across. I mean, this image is of a bridge that's collapsed, and people made an impromptu bridge so that you could cross the river there. But, I mean, it seems like a horrible situation to have to fill up everything that you care about into a couple of plastic bags and then just carry it miles and miles and miles until you get to some kind of evacuation shelter. So, really, really tough situation in Ukraine. Not the kind of stuff that we want to see. Fortunately, though, lawmakers have reached a deal on Ukrainian aid. Now, it's actually interesting. Congressional leaders reached a bipartisan deal early Wednesday, providing $13.6 billion to help Ukraine and European allies. This is part of a $1.5 trillion measure financing federal agencies for the rest of the year. So, I mean, the government's going to continue spending massive quantities of money. The aid sent to Ukraine is dwarfed by the overall spending that we've done financing the federal agencies. But still, $13.6 billion, that's quite a bit. Now, it's funny, actually, how this $13.6 billion number originated. So how we actually got to that was Joe Biden requested $10 billion for aid to Ukraine, and Democratic and Republican backing was so strong that the figure grew to $12 billion on Monday, and $13.6 billion just a day later, and they finally passed it. So all in all, good stuff. We're seeing some money go to help out Ukraine in the refugee crisis. It's the biggest refugee crisis that we've seen, I believe, since World War II, if I'm not mistaken. I believe I've read that somewhere. The biggest refugee crisis since World War II. A bunch of Ukrainian refugees are out there. And it's not just refugees that we're dealing with in Ukraine. It's also nuclear power plants. We're overall looking at some danger for nuclear power plants, okay? Chernobyl, the biggest nuclear disaster that we've ever had. The power plant there has been disconnected from the grid. So Ukraine has announced its first successful mass evacuation of civilians from the city of Sumy. So we are seeing a bunch of people trying to get out of Ukraine. But we will also talk about this Chernobyl story a little bit in just a second. We'll go down chronologically, right? The Kremlin said on Wednesday that the U.S. is waging a de facto economic war against Russia. So probably, yeah, that's essentially what we're doing, right? We're trying to cut them off economically and cripple them economically. So yeah, we are maybe waging a de facto economic war. That's typically what you could call it when we're implementing a ton of sanctions against a country, trying to stop them from sending their goods to us and to other countries, and working with other countries to make these deals that cuts them off economically. That's essentially what we're doing. So they've got something right. Now, the Ukraine foreign minister says 400,000 people are being held hostage, and the story just changed. Where did that go? Okay, 400,000 people are being held hostage in the besieged city of Mariupol. So 400,000 residents. We can actually see the quote right here from the Ukraine foreign minister. He says, Russia continues holding hostage over 400,000 people in Mariupol and blocks humanitarian aid and evacuation. Indiscriminate shelling continues. Almost 3,000 newborn babies lack medicine and food. I urge the world to act. Force Russia to stop its barbaric war on civilians and babies. And, that would certainly be nice if Russia were to stop, if we had the way to get Russia to stop. And potentially, some people say we should be invading Russia, or not invading Russia, but we should be defending Ukraine, right? People say we should be sending troops in. And, it's a tough situation because on the one hand, you certainly want to help out the civilians and the newborn babies that are being hurt by this situation. But on the other hand, you have Putin who says we've got nukes and we're not afraid to use them. And that could end the world if we do end up doing something, if we end up sending actual troops in. So you never know what Putin might actually end up doing, if he would actually end up launching those nukes, but it is a threat that he's made, and it's a really tough situation for the rest of the world to look at. I don't think people would be standing by to the extent that they are militarily if nukes weren't on the table, right? If Putin didn't have those nukes, I think we would probably have seen some kind of intervention because nobody likes what's going on in Ukraine, but it is a really tough situation. You have to decide, do you want to try to stop the atrocities going on and affecting the people in Ukraine at the risk of what might happen to the overall world? I mean, if nukes did fly, it would be a whole lot worse for the people in Ukraine than it is now. Hard to believe that would be the case, but it could be the end of the world if we did invade Russia. And that's not a guarantee. It's just something that Putin might decide to do. It's something that he's somewhat threatened to do. And it's a worrying situation, right? It's tough to say what the right thing to do in this situation is. Nobody is happy to be in the position of having to make these decisions, but it certainly is good that we're at least sending some aid to try to help the people in Ukraine out, because it is a tough situation out there. Nobody likes what's going on in Ukraine, but enough of the Russia-Ukraine story. We've got a lot of interesting stuff going on in the stock market, a lot of interesting stuff going on in crypto, and we actually have, before we get into that, a story about China and the progress that China is making on, taking down, not necessarily taking down the U.S., but some of the progress they're making on at least spying on us, right? So China's state-backed hackers compromised networks of at least 6 U.S. state governments, research finds. So a Chinese state-sponsored hacking group has successfully compromised the computer networks of at least 6 U.S. state governments between May 2021 and February of this year. So in the past 365 days, this has happened. The group, APT41, allegedly exploited vulnerabilities in web applications to get their initial foothold into state government networks. And APT41, this Chinese hacking group, carries out state-sponsored espionage on behalf of Beijing. And they took advantage of software flaws and quickly exploited security vulnerabilities that were made public by researchers. The hackers also adapted their tools to attack via different methods And this is just part of the world that we live in at this point. Cybersecurity is a very complex area. I mean, it's nearly impossible to secure anything 100% to make it 100% foolproof because at a certain point, even the best coders in the world are going to look at a system and it might just be too big, too complex to stop it from getting hacked. Now, one of the things that we do have that seems unhackable somewhat thus far is blockchain. Blockchain actually seems like a pretty darn tough system to hack. So we're going to see maybe the implementation of blockchain to some extent for maybe some government, secure government sites. Maybe we'll see that happen, as it is apparent, according to this research at least, that some China state-backed hackers were able to get into 6 state government websites and get into their data. So maybe we'll see the implementation of blockchain. That's out of my pay grade, though. I don't understand exactly how all of that works. I don't know how to code in anything, really. I mean, I did a little bit of Java at one point for some classes, but I don't know all that much about coding or about how to use the blockchain to secure stuff. But it seems like the kind of thing that we might want to start moving in the direction of. If we have this technology, we might want to start using it. Unfortunately, the government seems to be a little bit slow on pretty much everything. I mean, we'll see if they end up getting to that. I'm sure that private companies are taking it pretty seriously. We'll see what we end up doing with that. But regardless, cryptos and blockchain are very interesting areas, and today they're actually up pretty massively, as are stocks. The S&P is actually looking pretty darn good from the close of yesterday, and we'll see if we can break through this zone. Let's try to extend this out a little bit, just real quick. We'll try to pull this zone out a little bit just for the next couple of days to see if it continues acting as a support resistance zone for us. Right now it's acting as resistance. It looks like we touched the 426 in the pre-market, got bounced down. We'll see if we can break through that and get back on top of this zone today. Hopefully we can. It certainly rejected us yesterday. But back to Bitcoin and crypto, because Bitcoin and crypto are doing pretty darn well during the past 24 hours or so. We're up quite a bit. And let me show you guys what's going on with crypto. So Bitcoin is up 8% as Biden announces executive order on cryptocurrencies. So we haven't actually gotten this thing signed yet, but there is the announcement of this executive order. It's likely to be signed very soon. And Biden's executive order attempts to address a lack of a framework for the development of cryptocurrencies in the U.S., which critics say could leave the country's industry behind the rest of the world. Biden's policy calls for measures to protect American consumers, investors, and businesses, and to protect the U.S. and the global financial system and mitigate systemic risk. So it overall takes a pretty friendly stance towards crypto, which people were worried about it wouldn't. But it looks like it's taking a pretty friendly stance towards crypto. In fact, the executive order says, this is in the executive order, that the United States must maintain technological leadership in this rapidly growing space, supporting innovation while mitigating the risks for consumers, businesses, and the broader financial system and the climate. We'll see what kind of long-term impacts this executive order has. Essentially, it's trying to get federal agencies to look into cryptos, to look into the risks of cryptos, and to look into potential regulations for them. And it also directs the U.S. government to explore the technological infrastructure and capacity needs for a potential central bank digital currency. So potentially we'll be getting a crypto from the Fed that's run by the U.S. government. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of that idea. It's a potential way to do things, but it would essentially, over the long term, likely eliminate cash, and then all you've got is this stuff in this central bank digital currency, which takes away a lot of the good parts of crypto, right? The decentralization. If you're letting the central bank make a digital currency, that's about as centralized as you can get. It's not the decentralized currencies that we like that aren't able to be controlled by the government. It's very strongly able to be controlled by the government, and at any point the government could shut off wallets and do whatnot. I'm a much bigger fan of things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, even Dogecoin and stuff like Shiba Inu. I'm a much bigger fan of than a central bank digital currency, because that would just give the government a whole bunch of control over people's wealth and their money. Now, we are getting the market open right here. We're going to look at this, and then we're going to look at what happened with crypto prices. But the market seems to be reacting decently today. The S&P is up 2%. The Russell's is up 1.5%. Gold is actually down in a pretty big way. And over the past while, it's been doing pretty good, but we did just have a big sell-off, it looks like, during the pre-market today, as oil prices have been declining. We've also seen gold take a tumble with those. Oil prices are down about 5%. This might just be a little blip in the radar. We might be on the way back up, depending on what Russia does next. If they do decide to actually stop sending oil to the European Union, that could be pretty devastating for oil prices. And analysts have said we could see them going up by $20 to $30 per barrel easily if that does end up happening. So we'll see what goes on with it. But at the very least, we're looking at stocks moving up today on that news. So most of the market's pretty darn green. There's only a couple of areas like CEI, an oil-based play, that are down today. And we'll see if oil comes back. Hopefully it can. CEI is taking a big tumble, though. It's down 16% today. It was down pretty massively yesterday. We'll see what happens with it. And breaking news from CNBC, Dow rebounds 550 points as the rally in commodity prices driven by Ukraine conflict cools off. So overall, good stuff for the stock market. But it's not up as much as cryptos, okay? Cryptos are actually up quite a bit more. Bitcoin's up 8.5%, Ethereum up 6%, BNB up 3%, Ripple 4%, Terra Luna up 22%. A lot of these cryptos are coming back in a big way. Dogecoin up 3%, Shiba Inu up 4%. So a lot of these cryptos are up pretty big on this executive order news. And it's exciting to see. A lot of people have been waiting for this big rally in cryptos. You can see Bitcoin. We'll actually look at the chart. It's not necessarily at all-time highs on this rally. In fact, on the 2nd of this month, just about a week ago, we were up at 44,000, but this could be the beginning of another pump up, and maybe we'll break those highs that we've been getting stopped out at. It seems like we've really found a pretty significant resistance around 44,000. That's where we've gotten stopped out at the past couple of times we've tried to break through. Fortunately, though, it is notable that if you look at the Bitcoin chart right here, we are making higher lows. So on the 24th of January, we got down around 33,000 for Bitcoin. Then on the 23rd of February, we got down to 34,000. And most recently, our low was around 37,000. So we are making higher lows. That's a good sign. Overall, we could be trending up. Hopefully, we'll end up making new highs sometime soon. And, I know all the crypto fans out there will be very happy to see Bitcoin continue soaring as it has for the past many, many years. Now, that's not to say there hasn't been big pain in Bitcoin from time to time, but it has been the trend overall that Bitcoin's gained quite a bit of value. We'll see if that continues, though. We'll see if that continues. Hopefully it will. But we've also got a very interesting story. We'll save it for a little bit. We'll watch the markets for a little bit more because this is just a somewhat funny story. It's nothing too serious about the markets, but it is interesting. We'll zoom in on some of these charts and see what we've got going on with these big stocks. And Zach Taylor says, how many here have lived through a total economic collapse before? That probably depends on how many people are streaming this from Russia or Ukraine, right? But if you're living in the U.S., not so much. So let's do a quick search on Google Trends for MULN stock. It looks like we're getting some interest in MULN. It makes sense to see this, though, considering the fact that we're down a little bit today. We had peak interest yesterday, and today we are subsiding a little bit. We'll see what happens. People are saying, right? This is what I've heard people say in the comment section, that there's some kind of situation. It's always kind of the same story. With these short squeeze stocks that they like to hype them up quite a bit on weird catalysts almost, where some people were saying that today's the day, 20 million shorts are about to have to cover by close of the bell, and those seem like the kind of hyped up stories. I mean, I'll believe it when I see it, right? If we do see a massive explosion in MULN today, and I'm talking massive, then maybe that's the case, but oftentimes I think that people like to hype up these plays with stuff that's not necessarily true. I mean, I try to cover the real facts that are going on with these stocks in my videos, where we talk about the actual catalysts that are driving them up. But sometimes people like to bring up weird circumstances regarding the shorts and be a little bit potentially unrealistic and have these prophecies about, by the end of Friday, 22 million shorts are going to need to cover because of some rule. And it's not even the shorts that are there that are estimated by Ortex. I mean, Ortex doesn't even estimate that many shorts in MULN. And, it's these kind of impossible almost situations where if it was the truth, then we should already see the stock moving way up, because obviously institutions would know about it. Institutions would be buying in on it, trying to profit on it. And it would make no sense why the stock was as cheap as it was at the moment, right? There is potential in these stocks, but mostly based off of, I think, the attention that they can get due to a lot of the catalysts. And that's why we often like to look at the social metrics, right? Google Trends data, see how many people are looking into these. Oftentimes we'll look at stock twits as well to see what the stocks at the top of the leaderboard are. We'll pull that up real quick and see where MULN and CEI are ranking there. They were pretty darn high yesterday when they were hitting near their highs. But yeah, look at this. So CEI, still the number 2 top trender, MULN number 3, but they've both been overtaken by the SPY, which makes sense. Both of these stocks are down a little bit today, whereas a lot of other stocks are actually green. The S&P is actually up 2%. A lot of people might be trading the options on that. So we'll see what happens with MULN today. It's entirely possible that we will see some kind of pump, right? We are actually in the midst of what seems to be an uptrend right here. As long as we don't break down too much further, hopefully that will continue. But people do like to come up with these fantastical situations and say, there's tens of millions of shorts that are going to have to cover by the close of the bell this day. And it's the kind of stuff that I just don't buy into. Some people like to talk about it and hype them up in that way. I like to take a little bit more of a realistic approach with it. And, if we ever really see a massive pump happen, I'll believe it when I see it. But we've yet to see that mother of all short squeezes with most of these stocks. We saw something very impressive with AMC. But short of that, we've yet to see a real massive pump. And even AMC didn't get to the highs that a lot of people were talking about. People were saying $5,000 per share AMC. We topped out around 72. And we could certainly pump up again if interest goes up. But that's really what we'd be looking for, right? We'd really be looking for a bunch of interest flowing into these stocks. And there are catalysts that could be doing it. Looking at the short interest, if people ever actually want to look at the short interest on AMC, the short interest estimated by Ortex, you can see a situation where you've got more shorts in AMC now. If people are interested in squeezing out shorts, you've got more shorts in AMC now, at least as estimated by Ortex, than what you had during the initial pump up. So it's an interesting situation right there, where you've got a ton of shorts in AMC, and obviously, the overall stock market's been hurting a bit. So it's understandable that, a lot of these stocks aren't doing too great. AMC is actually notably green on the day, as is Sundial, but you're looking at a situation where, unfortunately, a lot of these stocks are hurting a bit. A lot of the favorites on the channel, DWAC, even is, it is actually green today. It looks like we're going to be struggling with $80 today, which we did slam through yesterday, unfortunately. Right as the market was opening, we just plummeted down to around $70, where we found some support, made it back up to 80, got bounced off of that. It looks like we're playing with 80 again today. Hopefully we'll be able to get back above it. It seems like some people got a little bit fearful with DWAC. It seems like there was a whole bunch of sellers just towards the beginning of the day for a couple of hours before some people started picking it back up, moving us back up. But people were probably, in my opinion, getting a little bit fearful. One, they saw DWAC moving down pretty decently the day before. And two, they were expecting, maybe some people were expecting a bigger pump off of the True Social news. And to be fair, we could have seen a bigger pump if things had gone a little bit, if things had been done a little bit differently. We might have seen a slightly larger pump on DWAC if we ended up getting True Social coming out. If a ton of people had been able to sign up, obviously it's completely understandable that when a ton of people are signing up for a platform, there are going to be some issues. There are going to be some wait lists. But also, if we'd gotten some numbers coming out from the team at DWAC and TMTG, if we'd gotten those numbers coming out in the next couple of days, if they'd actually said, here's how many millions of people signed up for XYZ service, then it would have been nice to to maybe have that. And that could have rallied some support if people really saw, wow, we're getting record numbers here. As of yet, I don't believe we've actually gotten any official numbers for them. So we're still waiting to see how many new users have signed up and whatnot. We've only gotten estimates, I believe, and most of those came in on day one about how many people were using were downloading the app. So we'll see what happens with it over the long term. I think once we do start really hearing about the numbers of new users and downloads and all that, and especially once it starts becoming more of a worldwide application. Right now it's just on iOS. We're still waiting for the Android version and the web version. I think we'll probably start to see probably price appreciation, hopefully at least, right? It's going to be tough to say exactly where this one will end up price-wise, right? Until we really start to see them generating revenues and collecting profit from their services. It's tough to say how many people are just going to be users of the app and how many people will be subscribers to their services, paying them. It's tough to say, but Jeff Duvall asks about Sundial. Rob, when does the Alcana merger actually go through? So for Sundial, the Alcana merger, that actually goes through. They've said they expect it to finish by March 30th. So we're still waiting to see exactly when that will happen. But they said by March 30th. So sometime in the next 21 days, just about, at the latest, right? It could happen tomorrow, but at some point within the next 21 days, obviously, they've postponed thing after thing with this whole Alcana acquisition. So maybe it gets postponed again. But they've said, the last thing they said, I believe they said it maybe a week and a half ago, maybe it was just a week ago, that the Alcana acquisition should be going through by March 30th, right? They said that's the date that they'd like to have it done by. So sometime soon, sometime in March, we'll hopefully see that happen sometime soon. I'm eagerly awaiting it, right? I'm waiting for that. We've also got Sundial's earnings call coming up on the 17th. Let's pull that up on the chart right here. Or let's pull up Sundial on a better chart. I know my face is covering some of that one. We've got Sundial's earnings call on the 17th. That could be a big day for them. The last earnings call they had was when they actually pumped up close to 99.99 cents. You can't see it on this chart. It was during the after hours pre-market that they did that. The highs that they got to intraday were 95 cents. So their last earnings call, they pumped up quite a bit. And from the day of their earnings call, right before they released that news, they were up 40% just on the earnings call. So we'll see if they get good news again. It's potentially possible that a lot of the inflationary pressures have maybe hit Sundial's bottom line. We'll see if their cost per gram to grow has gone up significantly. We'll just have to see on the 17th what they end up saying and if they've got great news or whatnot. But we could see them really hype up legalization catalysts, because this is the earnings call that's happening right before we start to see a bunch of these legalization catalysts really manifest themselves in the real world, right? We've already gotten, Nancy Mace and the States Reforms Act, right? Legalizing cannabis, that's a House bill, that's a Republican-led bill, and Amazon has endorsed that bill. So we've already got some big corporations on board with it, but we are seeing Chuck Schumer enter his own cannabis legalization bill at some point in April. And what I think we might end up seeing is a combination bill kind of go through. We might end up seeing parts of both bills go through, and that way it can be bipartisan, right? Because you do kind of want a bipartisan situation where Democrats and Republicans are going to be able to get this through. Now, what you might see is Democrats could be working very closely with Republicans. They might be very willing to work with Republicans to get a bill through by the November midterms, because as of right now, a lot of people are upset with the Democratic leadership, right? A lot of people are upset with Joe Biden. There's a very low approval rating for him right now. A lot of people are upset about the situation with oil and Russia and Ukraine. A lot of people are upset with Democrats for a variety of reasons. And during the November midterms, Democrats are going to want to rally up some support. And the last thing that they want, right? The last thing that they want, since they're supposedly the party that's been trying to legalize cannabis, though they haven't been able to do it yet. It doesn't seem like they've been working too hard on that yet, but supposedly they're the party that's trying to legalize cannabis and has been for a long time. They are not going to want a situation where Republicans take the House and the Senate and then get a Republican-led cannabis legalization bill through without the help of Democrats. That would be catastrophic, right? People are already a little bit upset with Democrats right now. If Republicans end up getting a cannabis-led or a Republican-led cannabis legalization bill through without Democrats, I mean, that's going to be a slap in the face to them. People are going to look at them like they're ridiculous, and then they're going to look at Biden. And if he decides to veto it and not sign it, that's going to piss a lot of people off too. So Biden's going to be in a tough spot. So I think the last thing that Democrats really want is for there not to be big cannabis legalization talks and potentially a bipartisan bill, if not a Democrat-led bill, sometime before the midterm elections. I mean, it would be a tough situation for them if that happened. I mean, we know, we've seen the studies that massive quantities of people, massive percentages of people are in favor of cannabis legalization at this point. It's a majority of Democrats, independents, and Republicans. It's a vast majority of a lot of those groups. Republicans, it's kind of close to 50-50, but still a majority, right? And typically in the United States, majority should rule, ideally, right? We'll see if that ends up going on. It hasn't gone on with cannabis legalization in the past, but it's such a popular issue right now, and we're seeing so many big players start to take a stance on it that I think it's unlikely we don't start to see a bunch of real-world manifestations of people's legalization desires start to take hold, right? I think that Sndl is probably going to benefit big time when that ends up happening. And Heckler Coke asks, Rob, when does DWAC merge with TMTG? We don't actually know yet, right? We don't actually know when they're going to merge with TMTG. Sometime, I believe, if I have it on the tip of my tongue, right? Sometime, I think it has to be before a year out, if I'm not mistaken. It has to be before a year out from when, let's pull up the DWAC chart. I might be mistaken about this, but it has to at least be a year from when they announce the merger. If I'm not mistaken, it's either that they do the merger or they have to give a lot of the money back to people. So we'll see a situation where the merger probably goes through sometime before October of 2022. But, I mean, it's probably going to happen sooner than that, right? It's probably going to happen sooner than that. This has been a relatively a long time, right? Since October is when we got this announcement, October 21st. And it's been a long time that we've been trading as DWAC. But we have actually seen interesting stuff. When SPACs, I've noticed, when they start trading as the actual company, the actual ticker symbol, they start to perform a whole lot better than what they were doing previously. In fact, you can look at BRCC, Black Rifle Coffee Company, which, I know some people aren't a big fan of. I do drink out of a Black Rifle Coffee Company mug. But, I know people aren't, not everyone's a fan of that company. But I will say, stock price-wise at least, you're looking at a situation where they started performing much better than when they were SBEA, which you can't actually see the chart for anymore, but SBEA had a little pump up the day of the announcement that they're merging with BRCC. They pumped up, and then they moved down low. They were trading around $10 per share for the longest time, and you can see the BRCC chart. As soon as they started trading as BRCC, it was, they more than doubled in price, right? Got to $22. Now they're closer to 16, but it's still a big appreciation over what they were doing as SBEA. So we could see something similar with DWAC, right? We could see something similar where as soon as DWAC starts trading as TMTG, people have a lot more faith in the company. Obviously, there's always the risk with a SPAC that something will fall through, that the deal won't actually end up happening. There are lawsuits going on about the SPAC, so we'll see what goes on with those. Hopefully, they'll just be a smooth transition right from DWAC to TMTG like we saw with Black Rifle Coffee Company. But there's never such a thing as a guarantee in the stock market, right? You never know what's going to happen. And so there is some risk to DWAC as it is, right? There's some risk to DWAC that won't be there when it's TMTG, and that could lead to people who are a little bit more risk averse finally being willing to buy in and get into this company. So that could be a cause for an appreciation in price, in addition to the fact that recognizable ticker symbols tend to perform a little bit better. And that's just something that you tend to see typically over the long term. They tend to perform a little bit better, but surely over the short term as well. We just saw it with Black Rifle, and it could happen in DWAC. Hopefully it will, right? Now we wanted to pull up CEI and just talk a little bit about that. That one did unfortunately move down in a big way, and it's not getting too much love today, right? We are actually moving up. Over the actual trading hours of the day, right? We started out a little shaky. We're moving up as it is, but we're still down about 10% from close. Unfortunately, though, we saw a massive amount of red yesterday. Now, some people probably got scared, sold out at $1. Other people are probably still holding. I'm still holding some CEI. It's not the biggest position that I've got, but I am still a little bullish on the potential for energy prices to go up. I think that if Russia announces something over the next couple of days about them pulling out of Europe, we could see another big rally in this thing. And that would most likely be led by a big rally in oil prices. Now, what I often think about stocks and trading, right, is there are a lot of people who will just jump into a stock. They're not thinking too much about why they might be jumping into a stock. They just see, oh, the stock's going up, it's a momentum trade, and they get in, and they don't have too many convictions about why they might think the price is going up, right? I really like, when I choose stocks to get into, to have a reason why the stock is likely to rise. And a good example of that is Sundial. I'll explain Sundial first. But a big example of that is I think Sundial is likely to rise because, well, I'll explain first off that, you can just look at a chart and say, oh, I think it's gonna bounce here, it's gonna do that. And there are some aspects to technical analysis that you can definitely benefit from them, especially in the short term. It seems to be a bit more prevalent than the long term. But over the long term, you can even see some moves based off of TA as well. However, what I think is more prevalent is a lot of people oftentimes will just jump into a stock. They won't know exactly why they're jumping in. They think it's a good buy. They think that the stock is probably going to start doing better. And they base their buy off of a lot of things that they don't actually know for sure. And once again, in the stock market, you can't know anything for sure. But, people oftentimes might buy these things not even knowing what's going to happen with 50% confidence, right? They're just kind of buying some stocks, maybe even randomly. And what I like is to figure out a catalyst, not stock related necessarily, that's potentially going to create a bunch of growth in a stock price. So with Sundial, that would be legalization hype, right? I think that there is a good potential of predicting when we might start to see a bunch of legalization catalysts coming in. And thus, you could maybe translate that into Sundial stock price, and that might be a time when we'll see Sundial moving up. I think that when we start to see legalization becoming a big deal, which is something that's a bit easier to predict than just do you think a stock is going up or down, because that's almost random, right? A bunch of studies have proven that it's basically random how stocks move day to day, right? It's very tough to predict where a stock is going day to day. However, if you can predict overall catalysts that might drive a specific type of stock or a specific company, then maybe you have a higher likelihood of being able to do that, right? Obviously, you can't say for sure if we're going to see a bunch of legalization catalysts later this year. My suspicion is we will, and that's what I'm basing a lot of this Sundial bullishness on, right? I'm basing it on the fact that we'll likely see a bunch of cannabis legalization catalysts moving this stock up. I think that people buy the stock when cannabis is likely to become legal. So you can kind of identify these non-stock market catalysts that could drive the stock market up, things that might happen in the real world that might drive the stock market up. For instance, with CEI, right? Oil play. This is a hypey oil play. You're looking at a situation where you might be able to anticipate Russia cutting off support for the EU, as a lot of people fear they might, as they've said they will. I believe that someone in Russia, the deputy prime minister of Russia, I believe, has said that Russia is strongly considering that move to cut off Russian oil from Europe, right? They're threatening to not send Russian oil to Europe anymore. If they end up doing that, that's when I think oil prices might go up, and they could go up significantly. Now, do I think they'll double? No, probably not. But something that might double is a small market cap oil play, CEI, right? This one could double off of that news, off of that hype. Maybe not in the long term, but in the short term, there's potential money to be made there. So that's why I'm in CEI, right? I think that there's a good chance that we end up seeing oil prices uptick quite a bit as we start to get some real-world catalysts that might be a little bit more predictable than just day-to-day, what do you think is going on in the stock market? Zach Taylor says, Rob, your favorite Reuters is now reporting on the U.S. biolabs in Ukraine, so you can talk about it. The biolabs in Ukraine. Let's see what Reuters is saying. I've not heard of this story yet. Biolabs. Let's see what we've got. So, look at this. Okay, so Russia says U.S. has biolabs with plague and anthrax in Ukraine. U.S. calls the claim absurd. So Russia said on Wednesday the United States must explain what Moscow claims was a military biological program in Ukraine, an allegation Washington has already dismissed as absurd misinformation. Russia Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria said evidence of the alleged program has been uncovered by Russia during what it calls its military operation in Ukraine, which it started on February 24th. It involved deadly pathogens, including plague and anthrax, she said. A Ukrainian presidential spokesperson said Ukraine strictly denies any such allegation. In response to earlier Russia allegations about the purported military biological program in Ukraine, a Pentagon spokeswoman said on Tuesday, this absurd Russian misinformation is patently false. Russia had documents showing that the Ukrainian health ministry had ordered the destruction of samples of plague, cholera, anthrax, and other pathogens after. Okay, so Zakharova said Russia had documents showing the destruction of samples of plague, cholera, anthrax, and other pathogens after February 24th. We can already conclude that in Ukrainian biological laboratories in direct proximity to the territory of our country, development of components of biological weapons was being carried out, she said. It was not possible to independently confirm the authenticity of any such documents. So, look at that. Interesting story, It makes sense that if the U.S. was to have biological labs, they wouldn't want them in the U.S. They'd probably want them next to some of their enemies, like Russia. So, if I was playing a real-time strategy game and I was deciding where to place those labs, it would probably be closer to my enemies than in my own country. So, not the worst idea, but an interesting story, right? I don't know anything about it. I've never actually heard of this before, but it's an interesting story, at the very least. That's interesting stuff. Who knows what we're working on behind the shadows? I'm sure the government doesn't tell us everything. We know that for sure. It wouldn't surprise me to hear that these claims are real, right? Though I would have thought that we would be giving maybe a little bit more support to Ukraine if we were worried about our super cool weapons labs being destroyed or taken over. Though if we're just destroying all of the stuff in them, then I suppose that could work as well. But who knows what's going on with that whole situation. Regardless, guys, we've got a couple minutes in the stream left, and there is an interesting story that I wanted to pull up. Nothing too serious, just something lighthearted to end the day on, because the world has gotten pretty brutal as of late. And, we're lucky enough to be in a place where we can think about lighthearted things. So, online daters lost a record of $547 million to scams in 2021. Romance scams have surged during the pandemic, cheating online daters out of millions of dollars in the quest for love. So you guys have to think about it. If you're messaging anyone online and they're posting a bunch of these bikini pictures and whatnot, and it seems too good to be true, you got to think really hard before you send the money, because it might be a scam. These scams are becoming pretty darn prevalent. Since 2017, you can see massive quantities in the increases of losses that we've seen, right? The total dollars lost. And these are just reported scams. There are a bunch of people out there who are probably not reporting these scams, who are too embarrassed. They just say goodbye to the $10,000 they sent to that lady, right? Or that guy pretending to be a lady. So, there are probably situations where people are getting scammed all the time, and there are just big scam farms going on. People just take pictures of ladies online and post them, pretend to be those ladies, talk to you for a while, take your money. That's certainly a situation that could be going on, and is a lot more prevalent today than it was 5 or 6 years ago, right? In 2017, we only lost $87 million to those scams. 2018, $145 million. 2019, $200 million. 2020, $307 million. Then the biggest increase yet in 2021 due to the pandemic. A lot of people locked indoors. A lot of people decided to use these online sites maybe, and a lot of people decided to start scamming money from these online sites. $547 million lost. 57,000 reported scams compared to 17,000 in 2017. So it's a very prevalent issue. A bunch of people getting scammed out of their money. Don't believe it, guys. Don't believe that online stuff. Don't believe those ladies. If they won't meet you in person, they're probably not real. That's just my opinion. Anyways, guys, I will say we've got about 100-something viewers on the YouTube stream. We've got some people on the Rumble stream. Feel free to hit the like button, to hit the Rumble button. It is very much appreciated. Susan L says Rob deserves more likes. Rocky Mountain Gobblers says give Rob a like. I would appreciate it. It does help out the algorithm. It shows that people appreciate the stream and whatnot. And so it would be very much appreciated if anyone does want to hit that like button. It certainly does help out. And before we end, I do want to plug the Locals channel. It's the top link in the description, the private stock group. We're starting to get a bunch more members in there. We're really starting to grow this channel out. And I'll show you guys. We post pretty much every day. We post about the oil bans, California gas prices, the stock market. Typically on Friday we say something maybe a little bit more relaxed, just wanting to get people in a good mindset for the weekend. And we talk about some of the trades I'm taking, right? Some of the options plays, some statistical information. Cathie Wood just ended up matching what Warren Buffett did, right? Instead of being way ahead, the ARK Invest Fund is down to what Berkshire Hathaway has performed. So you see the blue line right there compared to the red line. Looks like Buffett caught up to Cathie Wood. We talk about Jerome Powell's testimony. We put down our notes, all kinds of stuff. It's the free stock group. You guys can support it if you wish, but it doesn't actually cost anything to see pretty much all those posts. So feel free to do that if you want. We're trying to grow that thing out. And if anyone wants to join, it's much appreciated. But other than that, guys, that's the stream for the day. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Looks like the market's in a pretty good place, up 2%. Oil's not in a good place, but we maybe have some catalysts coming down the pipeline, literally and figuratively, or not coming down the pipeline, I should say, that could be driving oil prices up. So if you appreciate the stream, once again, feel free to throw a like. Check out the Locals channel if you're on Rumble. It's the big red join button or top link in description. And other than that, guys, I don't think there's anything else, but have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow for whatever crazy news there is in the stock market. Bye, guys.